We're on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, and we're up to Mesvei on the top line. And we're now asking a kasha based on a brisa, which seems to contradict the sheet of Rav. Rav holds that Sikasan Zuhi Asiyasan, which means in the case of tzitzis, as we discussed, that if the chutim of the tzitzis were placed in on the corners before he actually cut down the chutim, then all he has to do is cut them down, and according to Rav, that solves the problem of tasev v'lo. And that's called psikasam zuyasiyasam. When he cuts the ends of the chutim of the tzitzis, that's considered as if he had put it in from the get-go. Whereas Shmuel was of the opinion that we don't apply the principle of chituch, that cutting the rashi chutim is considered asiyas hatzitzis, and therefore, according to Shmuel, you would have to actually take out the tzitzis and start from scratch and put them back in a second time. And the Gemara asks the following kasha. Meisvei, we have a brisa that says Tala'on, if he already attached the tzitzis to his beged, v'lo pasak rashi chutim shalem, he hasn't yet cut the chutim, so he has a chut aruch, he has a very long chut, which is folded up into four, and that's how he tied it down. Psulim. My love, shouldn't we assume in this brisa that psulim liolam, meaning even if he would cut the rashi chutim and make it into four chutim, that would not be enough to be machshir until he takes off the chutim, and he has to tie them michadash anew, because the tzitzis were done b'psul, and psikas hachutim, cutting down the chutim, is not considered asiyasan. Tiyuvta de Rav, this is a kash on Rav, and this would support the sheet of Shmuel, because according to Rav, the tzitzis are not psulim liolam, quote unquote, but rather they're psulim until you cut the chute, the rashi chutim, and that cutting, that psikasam, is considered a gemara asiyah, and now you have a asiyah behechsher, and you solve the problem of tasev v'lo menaseh. The brisa doesn't offer that possibility. Rav is going to reinterpret the brisa. Doesn't mean pasul yolam the way we understood it. My psulim, what does the brisa mean when it says psulin? Psulin ad sheyifseku, until the time that he cuts the rashi hachutim. But after he cuts the rashi hachutim, they are in fact sheira, because that's considered the gemara asiyah, and he has solved the problem of tasev v'lo menaseh. Shmuel Amar psulin liolam. Even if he would cut the rashi hachutim, that would not be enough. He has to be matir the ksharim, and again reattach the chutim with their ksharim. V'chein Omer Levi agrees with Shmuel psulim liolam. V'chein Omer Rav Masna Omer Shmuel psulim liolam. Ika diamre. Now we have a different shmua of Rav Masna in the name of Shmuel, in a different lishna. Rav Masna was not coming to interpret the brisa, but rather Omer Rav Masna b'didi avi uvda. We had a ma'isa of tzitzis that he tied it down to his beged before he cut the tzitzis b'rasheim. Asoy lekami d'mar Shmuel. We took the question in front of Shmuel via Omali, and he told us that psulim liolam, that you have to take apart the knot and you have to reattach the chutim into the beged. It's not enough to just cut the rashi hachutim. Meisvei, the Gemara has another objection against Rav from a different brisa. The brisa says Tla'on, he took the tzitzis and he attached them to his beged before he cut the rashi hachutim. And then subsequently he cut down the rashi hachutim psulim. It's clear from this brisa that even after psikas rashi hachutim, the tzitzis are still invalid, and we don't say psikasam tu yasiyasam. The Odin, furthermore, Tanya, we have a brisa with regard to Sukkah. The Torah says Chagas Sukkahs tasa lecha tasa v'lo mina osui, that at the time that you make the Sukkah, it's got to be a Sukkah kshera, and not a Sukkah that was made b'psul. And if it was done b'psul, then even if you be machshir and remove that psul with a tikkun muat, without a maisa michadash, the sukkah remains psul. Mikan omru, therefore, hidla aleh es hagefen, ves hadolas, ves hakisom. All these are what's called mechuber lekarka, and he has, instead of schach, he has the vine or this gourd and sichech hagabam, and then he puts the sukkah that's not mechuber lekarka on top of the sukkah, on top of this schach of gefen, dlas, and kisom, which is mechuber lekarka. And the Brisa says psula. So the Gemara asks, Heichi Domi, what's the case? If we're talking about a case, he did not cut down these branches and they're still attached. Is my area, why did the Brisa have to invoke the principle of Mishum Tasav V'lo? The reason why the sukkah is disqualified is because of Tasav V'lo. Typically, he could have derived the psul to mechubarim ninu, because the branches are still attached to the ground, and therefore the sukkah is psula. Ella, but rather bit shekatzitzon. It must be a case where he cut down and detached the branches from the tree after he had already been mesachech. He already put it onto his sukkah. Uktania, nevertheless, psula. The Brisa establishes that the sukkah remains invalid. Uktani psula shmamina, the law amrina ktitzosin zuyasiyasin, even though he cut it down and he detached the chibur, the sukkah remains psula. Is tuvta derav. This is an unanswered question against Rav. So let's just review the last Brisa, and we said the following: that if one lifted onto his sukkah a grapevine, a gourd, or ivy, that's his translation here in English of kisom, ivy, and he covered them on top with valid schach, the sukkah is still invalid. And if you're going to say that he did not detach the vines from the ground after spreading them over the sukkah, then why did the Brisa have to invoke the disqualification of tasav v'lo asui? It's invalid because they're attached to the ground. It's mechuber lekarka, which is posel schach, but rather it must be talking about the Brisa must be talking the case where he detached the grapevine or the gourd or the ivy after spreading them over the sukkah, and yet the Brisa teaches us that the sukkah remains invalid. So we see that we don't have the principle of Rav, of Ktsisasan, Zuyasiyasan, Omlecha Rav, Hachabayaskinon. What are we dealing with in this Brisa? The Shalfinu Shalufe. What he did was he pulled off the vines from the tree by hand. They're resting against the tree. Velo minkera asiya didhu. What does this mean? Talash es hanofim in ha'ilon. He nicham shochvim etzel ha'ilon b'makom k'tzisas. He left them there exactly where he cut them down. And lo nikeres b'kach k'tzisasan. It's not obvious to the spectator that he actually cut them down. And this k'tzisa is not considered asiya. We do not apply the principle of k'tzisasan zui asiyasan even according to Rav. But if it had been a k'tzitza nikeres, then the sukkah itself would be valid, would be kshera, because k'tzitzasan zuhi asiyasan. Now the Gemara goes back to the first kasha that we asked on Rav. Mikol makom, the brisa that we had before with regard to tzitzis, namely tlon v'achkach posach, is kasha l'Rav, kasha. So we don't have an answer to that question, that stira from the Bryce. Now, kasha is not the same as tufta. It seems that there is a possibility of answering this question, and we'll see soon that the Gemara is going to quote a machlokas tanoim whether k'tzitzasam zu yasiyasan or not. And Based on that, Rav would interpret that there's machlokas tanoim at this point, and that brisa therefore is reflecting the sheet of one particular tana who holds that we don't accept the principle of ktitzos and zuyasiyos. We assume that the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel is really, in fact, an earlier machlokas amongst the tanoim, based on a Mishnah later on in Daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis. And we have a case of a hadas. And in the case of hadas, if the berries, if the anaviv, merubim meha olim, so you have more berries than the leaves on the hadas, is the hadas is possible, too many berries. However, he's allowed to take off the berries until he has more olive than anovim, and in such a case, he's machshir the hadas. However, the Mishnah wants to know what happens if he does this on Yontif itself. On Yontif, because of something called nirikim, masakin mana, masakin kli, it's prohibited. You're not allowed to pluck off the berries on Shabbos to be machshir, even though it's only a halachic change, but that's enough to qualify as tikkun mana. Of our velikton, if he plucked out illegally, it was against the law, the anovim on Yontif, possible. Divrei Reb Shimon ben Yotzadok, v'chachamim machshirin. What is the machlokas? Savrua, the Tanoim or the Amoraim, thought that the Kuliyam, everybody agrees that lulav tzarech agad. The Gemara is going to derive this from Sukkah. Agad means that in order to fulfill your mitzvah of netilas lulav, you have to tie together, bind together the lulav with the hadasim and the aravos together. And therefore, we have halach of asiyah in lulav. The agad is called an asiyah. And Yalfinon, from whence do we derive that the lulav needs agad? Lulav misukah, d'chsiv gabi sukkah, it says tasev v'lo mina asui. And just like in the case of sukkah, where the Torah says tasev, we need asiyah. And the asiyah of the sukkah has to be behechsher, v'lo mina asui, not from something where the sukkah was done with psul. The Torah is makbid that the asiyah should not be done with psul. So too, in the case of lulav, there's an asiyah, which means agad, together to bind the lulav with the other minim, is therefore the Torah's makbid, and at the time of the asiyah, it should be kosher, it should be no psul. And everybody agrees that lulav has a din of asiyah like sukkah. What is there for the machlok shin of Shimon Yod Tzaddik and the Chacham? My love, miflagi. It's the old machlokas between Rav and Shmuel, Bektisotzam, Zuyasiyos and Demar, Demand the Machshir Sovar, according to the Chachamim that say if you took off the berries on Yontif Vadas is kosher, Amrinon Gabi Sukkah, Ktsitzosan Zuyasiyosan, like Rav, and V'chein, the same law will apply to Lulav, which is derived from Sukkah Nami Amrinon Likitosim Zui Asiyosam, V'chein. Therefore, when he takes off the berries on Yontif, that's considered an asiyah. That is considered like a new agad of the lulav, and therefore there's no psul of tasev v'lo asui. Uman de pasabar of Shimon ben Yotzadok savar, he holds like the sheet of Shmuel. The law amrin gabi sukkah k'tzitzason zuhi asiyason, and therefore gabi lulav nami, lulav which is derived and equated to sukkah, law amrina l'k'tzitzason zuhi asiyason. And therefore, it's possible because of the psul of tasev v'lo asui, even after he plucks off the berries, he's tolech the anovim. So it comes out that Shmuel and Rav are arguing about the same achlokas of Reb Shimon Yod Tzaddik and the Chachamim. The Gemara rejects it low. The Kuli Alma, both Rabbi Shimon ben Yod Tzaddik and the Chacham agree to Shmuel's principle. The law, Amrin Gabi Sukkah. So what is the machlokas now? If there's no possibility of ktsitzasam zuyasiyasam, the melef lulav misukah yakab malfugi. They're arguing about the question of whether or not we derive lulav from an equation to sukkah. And just like in sukkah, there's a psul of tasev v'lo asui, so too, In lulav, there's a psul of tasav lulav man de bachshir. Quite the Chacham who say it's kosher when you remove the berries on yont lo yalfin and sukkah lulav mi sukkah, and therefore even though in sukkah there's a psul of tasav lulav, and if we applied it to lulav, then we would not be able to say that tzitasim tu yasiyasan. You would not be able to avoid the psul. But lo yalfina lulav mi sukkah, we don't have this halacha of tasav lo menasu regarding lulav, and therefore by being mamayit the anovim of the hadas after he was already ma'agid them, it's kosher, even though at the time of the igud it was possible. By the possible, Reb Shimon ben Yod Tzadok, who passes the hadas if he was mamayit the anovim on yontiv, savar he holds yalfina lulav misukah. And just like in Sukkah, there's a psul of tasav lo menasui, so too in lulav tasav lo menasui. And here at the time of the Agad, the Adas was possible because there was too many Anovim. Even if he's Memayit the Anovim, it's possible because the Agad, which is called an Asiya, was Bipsul. And we don't apply a principle of Likitasam Zui Asiyasam. So we can now interpret that both Tanoim accept the sheet of Shmuel. Below Amrinon, Tzitzasan Zui Asiyas. Ibai Sema. Another possible way of interpreting this Machlok Shim Reb Shimon Ben Yod Tzadok and the Chachamim is Isvi Roland the Lulav Tarch Agad, if it would have been universally agreed upon that Lulav requires an Agad, then Kuliyamalo Plidi Alfina and Lulav Misukah. And even the Chachamim would derive the principle of Tasav Lo Menasui from Lulav, from Sukkah to Lulav. And therefore, if after he did the Agad, he would now pluck off the berries, it would be possible. What is then the machlokas between Reb Shimon ben Yod Tzadok and the Chachamim? Mar Savar, according to Reb Shimon ben Yod Tzadok, Dorech Agad. Lulav requires Agad, and that's its Asiyah. And if in Lulav there's a din of Asiyah, then we're going to derive from Sukkah that there's a psul of Tasav Lo Menasu. And if the Asiyah was done b'psul, he was ma'agid the Lulav when there are too many anovim, berries on the adas, then it's possible. And he's going to need a new agad as a new Asiyah to replace the other Asiyah. Mars of the Chacham hold, ain't Tzarech Agad. Lulav does not require Agad. It doesn't have a din of Asiyah. And therefore, the halach of Tasav Lo Menasui is totally inapplicable to Lulav. Now the Gemara wants to know, what is it that lies at the heart of this machlok between Reb Shimon and Chacham regarding whether Lulav Tzarech Agad? We have a brisa that says Lulav bein agud, bein she'eno agud, kosher. The Tanakama holds that there's no chiyuv of agad in Lulav. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, agud kosher, she'eno agud pasul. Rabbi Yehuda requires agad, and it's absolutely critical. And you have to tie with a chut the Lulav together with the adas and the arava. And the Chacham hold that even if they're not connected at all, there's no binding whatsoever, it's kosher. However, even the Chacham agree that he has to take all these three minim together, but Notlam Bazechar Zel Loyot. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that he has to dafka tie them together. It's not enough that he takes them together, but everybody agrees they have to be taken together. My time with Rabbi Yehuda, why does Rabbi Yehuda assume that Lulav Tzarech Agad, Yolif Lukicha Lukicha Me'agudas Ezo? He has a Gzeira Shava of Lukicha Lukicha from the parsha of Agudas Ezo. Because with regard to the Agudas Eidos that they took with the Korban Pesach and Mitzrayim, it says there, Ksiv Hasam, Ulakachtem Agudas Eizo. So you see the word Aguda. You need an Aguda. Uksiv Hacha. And here in Parshas Emor with regard to the mitzvah of Lulav. So we started with Parshas Bo in the case of Pesach Mitzrayim. Now we're fast forwarding to Parshas Emor. And there it says, Ulakachtem Lachem Yom Rishon. And you take the lulav on the first day. is Ma'ala Halan, just like with regard to Azov, where the Torah also used the word Lekachtem, and the Torah requires Aguda, it says Agudas Azov, is Afkan. Here too in Lulav, where it says Lekachtem, we're going to nami be Aguda, we're going to acquire Aguda, we're going to take the word Agudas from the Parsha of Azov and graft it onto the Parsha of Lulav, as if it said explicitly that you require Agad in Lulav. That's going to be the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbanan hold that we don't require Agad in Lulav. Lekicha, milekicha lo yalfina. They never had this Gzeret Shava to equate Lekicha and Lulav with Lekicha of Agudas Ezov. Keman Azla Hadesanya, which Shita is reflected in the following brayso: Lulav mitzvah liogdo. Im lo ogdo kosher. This seems to be a middle of the way Shita. It's not here and it's not there. Rabbi Yehuda, if it's Rabbi Yehuda, then we have a problem. Because Rabbi Yehuda Olted Agad is absolutely critical, it's indispensable. Kilo Agoda my kosher. How can we square Rabbi Yehuda off with this price that says that even without Agad it's kosher? The Rabbanan, if we attribute this price to the authorship of the Rabbanan, Amai, why does it say mitzvah liyoda? My mitzvah. Why is there a mitzvah of Agad? Liolan Rabbanani. Even though the Rabbanan did not have the Gzera Shav of Lakicha, nevertheless they hold it's a mitzvah to do the Agad and to tie the lulav together with Hadas and the Arava. Mishum shenemar zeh keli Raveu. Hisna lefanav mitzvahs. This is a noi mitzvah. This beautifies the mitzvah. Make a sukkah that's beautiful, a lulav that's beautiful, tzitzis that's beautiful, sefer Torah that's beautiful. And therefore, you should make the lulav in a way that it's beautiful, it's attractive, and that na is through agad with the hadas and the aruch. We will stop for today. Thank you very much.